In the name of the Lord. Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. During an era where marriages are marked by conflict, even within the church, couples get a steady stream of messages like seek your own happiness or life is too short to live in an unhappy marriage. Some couples give up the fight only to find the next relationship is no different than the one they left. Our next guest says this unending cycle is not only wearisome, it's physically, emotionally, financially, or spiritually exhausting. Many of the conflicts in relationship begin with misunderstanding and are based on lies, she explains. Others, she says, are based on misguided expectations about roles and responsibilities within marriage. Her latest book, 12 Truths to Change Your Marriage, Nina Roesner explains the differences between a feminist version or during marriage and what she calls a complementarian approach. And then she offers a third idea, which is a holitarian approach. The Bible teaches that women are equal to men. Neither gender is better or less than the other. There are differences between the genders, differences between people, and therefore differences between marriages. Nina Roesner is the executive director of Greater Impact Ministries, a Christian training organization. Nina has more than 20 years in the communications and training industry, has coached executives, managers, individuals, wives, church staffs, and pastors around the country. As a professional speaker for Women's Group and the developers of Daughter of Sarah and the Respect Dare, she's seen hundreds of marriages positively impacted by the understanding and application of the biblical concept of respect. Nina writes consistently about family life and our identity in Christ on her blog. She's been married to her husband Jim since 1991. They have 3 wonderful children. And here to co-host the Respect Hour on the first Thursday of every month at 11 o'clock is the author of 12 Truths to Change Your Marriage, Nina Roesner. Nina, welcome to your edition of the Respect Dare here on Revealing the Truth.
It is great to be back, Rabbi Walker. Thank you.
Thank you. We've missed you, and glad you are feeling well and that all is well there in the beautiful Midwest place of Ohio. My daughter was just up in Cincinnati, took the grandbaby up to visit with his side of the family, and enjoyed it. She had not been to Cincinnati before, and so she enjoyed the trip and the local flavors of Grater's ice cream and Skyline chili and things like that. So tell us the latest with your ministry, what's going on, what's happening with Greater Impact. Kind of give us an update as to what's been happening.
Yeah, I was sitting in a board meeting last night. It was exciting because there's so many things that are new. We've added coaching to our repertoire of offerings. We have an online course called Strength and Dignity, and it's for married women who are in difficult marriages. And it's a space where they can find their purpose again and be who God's called them to be and handle situations in their marriage in a way that honors God and does not make them a doormat. Because a lot of these women, you mentioned complementarian, and we subscribe to this thought of holitarian marriage, which isn't even a thing anybody talks about but us and the food industry, that word. But basically we're saying that the entire Bible is true. And there's extremes in different camps when you talk about how marriage is supposed to go. And the Jesus I know is not about women being property, wives being property. There's freedom in Christ for all of us. And so we help women figure that out. And we've added coaching to that. And it's wonderful. We're very excited about 2020 because our staff is going to be growing and the ministry is growing. So we're just happy about that.
That's very exciting. Now, in this coaching, would you say that this kind of equates to a form of mentoring?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do group mentoring, group coaching. And basically, we help women move forward in the areas where they're stuck. So, if a woman has a situation, it's a repeating situation with her husband, and she doesn't know how to get past it. Well, all of the time, I mean, like 100% of the time, we're doing the same things over and over and over again. And you have the same stupid cycle over and over and over again. And people are stuck there. And so we help them unhitch themselves from the patterns of thought that are keeping them stuck and see something different. And the Lord reveals that to them through the Holy Spirit. And we just get to watch. It's just amazing to see women come unstuck from those things and move forward. Their whole family is different as a result. It's pretty cool.
You have been doing this for over 20 years, and in that time, you've seen a lot of marriages saved. You've seen a lot of women set free from this bondage mentality and this subservient role that men seem to be pre-wired with, that they're to be dominant, they're provider, protector, I am man, and we look at examples in the Bible where there was a point where God had somewhat of a women were almost chattel based on the roles that they were relegated to and the jobs that they were confined to doing. It was the fetching of water. It was the family rearing. There wasn't anything outside of the home in early biblical times. But we do see a number of women breaking out of that model either by circumstance, like a Deborah, or by opportunity, like an Esther, or a Ruth, who by circumstance and faith, all the different impactful areas, to finally we come to the woman at the well, who is an unlikely evangelist. She's kind of on a par with almost like a Jonah, a very reluctant prophetess, if you would. Not that she was prophesying, but she wound up bringing the message to the city, and the entire city came to faith. So we see the impact of a woman speaking out the word of the Lord and having a fascination with the Messiah and his knowledge of everything that was done. We do not foster, even in this era, of raising sons to be fathers and husbands, and raising daughters to be wives and mothers. We actually, curriculums and society examples say, no, each one is to be an individual and to pursue whatever they want, and they can chart their own course. Well, ultimately they wind up as fathers and mothers and husbands and wives. The greater percentage do, at least, and they're ill-equipped because they have no understanding whatsoever, because they've been fed with this entire narrative of go out, define, the world revolves around you. You're a new Copernican. You neither see the earth as the center of the universe or the sun as the center of the universe. You see yourself as the center of the universe, and everything revolves around you. That's a breeding ground for conflict, for identity crisis, for a honeymoon period that when it wears off, there's basically no foundation that's been laid. And
Right.
so your ministry is kind of the cleanup on aisle 6 from the mess that's been made, from the lack of. Nobody spoke to me about what a husband or a father was to do, and how to. It was you just wound up emulating what you were raised, and if that was dysfunctional, you're dysfunctional.
Yep.
So how do we get to this point where all of a sudden now we have strong voices coming out against women speaking in ministry?
Yeah, so accusation is going to come in any form. And I've struggled with this myself. I've been in meetings where people that I know verbally accost me for running a ministry and being a woman. I can't do anything about being a woman. And if my relationship with God is real, then I am doing what I'm called to do. And Satan he's the accuser. And so what I don't want is people to think, okay, so you've become one of those feminist people. That's a secular term. And if you look at secular culture, there's a whole lot of stuff going on that's not representing the church in any way, shape, or form. And we can tell by what happened in the Bible. There's a lot of biblical stories that demonstrate women that not only disobeyed their husbands and followed God, but were submissive and respectful in the way that they did it. And so we're redefining some of those terms because there's been some miscommunication that's been somewhat intentional, I think, by some people in the church, and it was good intentioned, and I believe that God uses that. But in the late 1970s, there was this complementarian idea. It wasn't called that. That came out because there needed to be an answer to second wave feminism. And so that concept was born. And then years later, the word complementarian came out. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's helper completer that's part of the words that are used to describe a woman. The problem is that some of that's been taken to the extreme the women that I deal with, some of them are living in abusive marriages, and their husbands would disagree that they're abusive because the way they view help is you're my servant. And the way that women view help is I'm not worthy of anything. And what's really true is that God created us all equal. We all have gifts. And when you look at the New Testament, and there's lots of controversy about this, and you can spend hours and hours and hours digging through all of the discussions on egalitarianism and complementarianism. And this is why I like holitarian, because it's like the whole Bible is true. And so one of the things in 2 Timothy, I believe, you're talking about, a woman shouldn't speak in church. She should ask her husband at home. And the problem is that that isn't representative of what Paul himself was actually doing, because he had women that were prophets with him. Okay. And so that existed. And so you have to look at the verses in a context, but they've been misapplied. And I think it's great that some of this is coming out differently now. And I will say that none of this women are always going to be in a position of being subservient, as long as our only option in breaching that or moving forward is fight. So when we lose the language of respect, when we don't know how to be communicative in a way that is gentle and kind and like Jesus, then we're having argument, and that is going to keep us in that space.
You know, there's something that when I came to faith, and you know that I grew up in the Jewish world and came to faith. My spiritual birthday is coming up on December 21st of 1996. And as I began to read the New Testament, I read these letters that Paul wrote. And then I started hearing, of course, I was going to Bible study then and hearing teachings. And I was hearing these statements being made that were basically doctrinal and universally applied because it was contained in a letter to a particular group that was gathering in Ephesus or in Corinth or in a particular area. And it puzzled me. And I asked the question, if you write me a letter and somebody else reads that letter, and the letter has to do with the circumstance that I am going through, and it gives me counsel or correction about something I am experiencing, how that can become applied universally as, wasn't Paul writing to this group of people because this particular behavior was being exhibited? Now, I can understand the application of it if the church that you're in or the church at large is exhibiting the same behaviors of people of no order, of a disrespectful environment, seeds of discord being planted, backbiting, gossip, and slander. If these things are occurring within your congregation, denomination, community, whatever, then here's the guidelines for how to handle those things. But to say that no woman should ever speak because he was addressing a particular issue is taking something which was specific and making it universal. And when we do that, we take it out of the context and we miss the message. This is the instruction manual for life, for ministry, for church function, for home management, for home fellowship. And yet what we do is we wind up taking this very macro view of everything, and we micromanage the scriptures to suit our circumstance. And when we do that, we create this incredible division. I just reported on this last week. There's now 19 specific denominational groups, and within those 19, there are 33,792 branches of denominations. That's how divided we are over issues like this. They're enough to divide the body. Well, anything that divides the body is a tool of Satan. God's the great unifier. And we're supposed to be learning patterns of unification. When you look at the women in the Bible that were unifiers, who were singularly set apart and given an assignment, no greater, bolder character than the character of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Against every social moray, social norm, against all the laws of Moses, this unmarried woman is told, you are carrying the Messiah, basically. And she says, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think of the opposition there and the accusation. And there's no record of the discussion that were had. But I can't even imagine what she went through. And yeah, as she watches Jesus grow up, she sees him do all of these things and she stores them in her heart. She tucks them away. And that just speaks so loudly to me about how strong her faith was, because and this is what we run into in marriages and in churches when there's opposition, in any way. I mean, there's churches that believe that women shouldn't even teach women, that they should only teach children, and that's even questionable. And the sad thing about that is that mentality then negates basically all of the Bible for women. Is that, essentially it is, here's these 5 scriptures that apply to you, and the rest of the Bible, it doesn't apply to you. And so there's no freedom for women. We're not supposed to gently approach a conflict and walk through that because we can't do anything. That's not being submissive, and that's not true. That is simply not true. It is not good for men to have wives that are doormats. And there's psychological research on this stuff that shows that when we disrespect ourselves and treat ourselves badly, other people take advantage of that. It creates an environment where a man, and I'm not saying all men do this by any stretch of the imagination. Some men are so in love with Jesus that it wouldn't even occur to them, but it increases the opportunity environmentally for that to happen, for him to treat her even worse. And so if we're going to move forward faith-wise, if we're going to move forward culturally, and if we're going to move the church forward, then we need to really understand who Jesus was. Because the Jesus I know basically says, and in the relationship that I have with him and the word that I've read, that everyone has gifts and everyone counts.
It's stunning to me. First of all, I come out of a matriarchal society. Okay, the Jewish world has been matriarchal since the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. It's been matriarchal because we were driven out of Israel. We wound up assimilating. The father of the child may or may not have been Jewish, but you would always know that the mother was Jewish. So it began where originally it was the seed of Abraham, it was the father's lineage. Now it became the mother. And that is the modern day interpretation in Israel. If your mother's Jewish, then you are Jewish. If your mother's not Jewish and your father's Jewish, well, you still can have rights as a citizen, but not be recognized as being halakhically, legally Jewish. And so when you come out of that and you get to the modern day, starting in the 1800s of Eastern Europe and what was formerly Russia and the Soviet Union, and you see the matriarchal society that came out. It was the mother that kept the tradition going. It was the mother that set the Shabbat table. It was the mother that was involved in the synagogue. It was the mother that was involved in the women's organization. There are a number of Hadassah and a number of Ort and a number of women's organizations within Judaism that are purely for the engagement of women in supporting roles to the advancement of Judaism, the protection of the customs and the identity of what it means to be Jewish. And you find one of the finest hospitals in Israel, Hadassah Hospital, is known throughout the world as being one of the best hospitals. Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. I mean, these are names that are very familiar. And so coming out of the modern day Jewish world, and seeing that I have a 93-year-old mother, the respect that I have for her, the society construct that I grew up in was always respect for women, that this was not something where they were subservient, that wouldn't stand for it. I have one sister who became a prominent attorney, who rose up in the ranks of a huge law firm, and was very accomplished. But she was also the head of a number of charity organizations, on the board of charitable organizations that were continuing to feed into the community. So the idea that that the monotheistic view, which is what Judaism is, we were the first monotheists, and Isaac being the first Jewish-born child, and the advancement of monotheism from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and then through the seed line, of course, of Messiah through the line of Judah, and then all of us are descendants of one of the tribes, the 12 tribes. Don't know unless you're a Levite which one you are, but nevertheless the traditions are the same, and that is you do pay respect to women, and women are in leadership positions. And when they began to ordain women and break the mold to say that women could become rabbis, this was a brand new movement. It's just in the last maybe 30 years that this has happened. There was not. The Orthodox community is opposed to everything anybody does if they don't do it their way. So the larger Jewish world embraced that, and there was no problem. They had equal standing to become a female rabbi. They're not recognized in Israel, but they are throughout the rest of the modern world. So to say that it's a biblical construct that women are to be subservient and that man is supposed to be dominant is a fallacy. Mm-hmm. It's not supported by the cultural evidence of the society which is birthed out of the Bible. Now, Christianity, starting with the foundational for the first 12, 13, 1400 years of Catholicism, a woman couldn't become a priest. She could become a nun. She could become a saint, right? But she couldn't become, she could perform a miracle and be worshipped and honored, but she couldn't be elevated to the status of any leadership role. That perpetuated across the foundation of now what represents 50% of the body as to the role of women. It's still in the Catholic Church. Mother Superior wields the power over the nuns and the children, but it's the priest that has all the man has all the power and authority. So we have very confusing messages, inconsistency throughout Christianity. Yeah.
Very true. And what's interesting, I've always wondered about this. And by the way, I always learn so much every time I talk to you. You're just a wealth of knowledge about all of these things. And I love the history that, because I think when you look at things through that lens, you can see stuff that you wouldn't otherwise, right? And one of the things that comes to mind in that is how God wasn't really interested in giving the people a king. He wasn't about hierarchy, right? And one of the results of the fall was hierarchy. There was your husband's going to rule over you, dominate, and that's such a negative experience for. And so are people called to just suffer through all of that? Well, I think we're all called to be like Jesus, and I don't see Jesus exerting his authority in a dominating kind of way, with the exception of the table turning, and that wasn't even aimed at one person. That was I don't know how that fits specifically, but relationally, you just didn't see that. He was very much about being patient and kind and direct but honest as he walked through relationship with those people. And yeah, I think that's what he wants from us. I think he modeled what he wanted. Even coming out of the tomb, I think it's interesting that the first real gospel good news presentation was given to a woman and she shared it. She was not believed. um, okay, and that's culture for you. But when you look at what did Jesus do, I think he did things a little differently than our culture does, a lot differently.
As an outsider, and I profess often that I'm a biblicist. I'm not. I came out of the synagogue into a Messianic synagogue, never a part of mainstream Christianity. I don't really know a lot of the nuances, but what I know in regards to women is all I ever hear that really stands out is you have to decide, are you a Martha or a Mary? And that's about the extent of your identity. You need to figure out in your gifting, are you a Martha or are you a Mary? And I'm thinking to myself, how limiting in this narrative of your identity in Messiah. First of all, how there is no male-female identity in Messiah. Paul writes that anybody who's a Messiah is a new creation. He doesn't say that you're a new man and you're a new woman. You are a new creation, right? And you are now called to a ministry. So that means this new creation, regardless of gender, is called into ministry as an ambassador of God. And this is the life you're to lead. And everything from that point on defines the cultural, the theological application of a life in Messiah is, and it is not gender specific. And in this isolated situation of an out of control community, that there was obviously dissension in the ranks. There was a problem that needed to be addressed. This is how the problem was addressed, and I've seen it play out in many congregations where there were power-grabbing, Gloria Steinem kind of attitudes that were very much they were to the extreme, and God's looking for a balance, and He even talks about weights and measures and a false balance being an abomination. If we take that to be a natural picture giving us a supernatural lesson, is that we can't be out of balance. We can't be too far one way or too far another way. That the narrow, he says, narrow is, so you walk along the way. That was Jesus says, I am the way. So you walk along that way and follow those patterns. We're talking with Nina Roesner, as we do on the first Thursday of every month in the 11 o'clock hour, author of the Respect Dare and the follow-on books, 12 Truths to Change Your Marriage, a Respect Dare Journey for Wives, and an incredible ministry affecting many marriages and families in the Ohio region and beyond, as through their website you are able to get in touch with them and the ministry that she is a part of, Greater Impact Ministries in Ohio. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue in this discussion of the role of women today in the modern day church and in the Bible. We'll be right back. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting Nations' new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitingnations.org. support.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, welcoming you to the Respect Der Hour with Nina Roesner. Nina, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Nina, historically there was a reason why women in Judaism, which is the foundation of first century, the Bible is really a description of first century Judaism, not first century Christianity. And women were not allowed, permitted to sit with men. They were not permitted to read from the sacred texts. And everyone has come to a false assumption as to why, and they don't understand at all the reason for it. And so if you ask and survey and say, well, why in the synagogue in Jerusalem, the first temple, the second temple, was there the women's courtyard separated from the men? And I say, well, because women were subservient to men, and that's absolutely not the case at all. The simple reason is that a woman has a cycle, and during that cycle, she is considered to be unclean. Therefore, not knowing and not having a section for the not in my cycle and in my cycle and really embarrassing and pointing out which women were unclean and which women were clean, they chose to separate men from women so that nothing would be contaminated by someone who was on their period. Mm-hmm. This was very simple because the all the requirements were that if you come into contact with blood, you are to be ceremonially cleansed. You are to be kept outside, male or female, had to be prohibited from other human contact. Then they had to go into the pool, the mikveh pool, be cleansed, and then be presented to the priest to be determined that they were now clean. So this was about clean and unclean. This had nothing to do with gender. It had to do with a woman's cycle. And so the prohibition, so you'll find now in Orthodox Judaism, a man won't shake a woman's hand. In Israel, a man won't touch a woman. They'll back away because they don't know whether or not you are clean or unclean. Whatever you touch would be considered to be made unclean. So because of that, it's now been perpetuated that, well, yes, this was the societal, and when Jesus was talking to the Samaritan woman, that was the thought of the day, was that he was talking to someone who had the potential of being unclean without realizing that he was the one that made the unclean clean. So you say, okay, didn't he defile himself and break the law when he touched something unclean? No, by virtue of him touching it, it became clean. Did it become clean while he was reaching for it, as he had the thought? We have to believe that by the time he touched the dead, they were no longer dead. By the time he touched the unclean, they were no longer unclean. By the time he touched the lepers, they were no longer lepers. We have to look at it from a lens that this was the Messiah, and he had to fulfill all of this. Well, the look, and that's the only foundation that Christianity had, was to look at how the construct of the synagogue of the great temple was, and that was the foundation of, because after the crucifixion, it still operated for another 37 years. Okay? Still in the same way, still in the courtyard of the women, still separation. So there wasn't a change in how it operated. They could study in the court of the Gentiles, okay, and join together with the Acts chapter 2 kind of relationships, and you see men and women studying together, because now this picture that what God has proclaimed as clean is clean. It's no longer under the law of us determining as under the Mosaic system what is clean or unclean. So the whole dynamic changes, and the whole paradigm shifts at Jesus' conversation with the Samaritan woman. And he embraced engagement with women. He had meals with women. It wasn't that he was a flirtatious womanizer. It was that he was bringing a gospel that was different than the gospel of the law of Moses. And so it's now become very, very much perverted in Orthodox Judaism. Women wear wigs. You can't see their no other man but her husband can see her hair. So all the ultra-Orthodox women wear wigs. The ultra-Orthodox men all wear very large hats, okay, to become very distinctly. So don't even approach them. This is the scarlet letter, if you will, that points you out. So as we as a society often do, is we take a basic truth and a concept that we don't understand, we create some myth about it, and then we perpetuate the myth instead of embracing the fact. And in modern Judaism today, it's still a fact that the women are in Orthodox, in Reform and Conservative, they're not separate. They're not as concerned with this clean and unclean narrative. But I would not be surprised if in the millennial reign, if we didn't go back to something similar. We know that we will have Gentile priests. We just don't know what, there's no instruction as to where women will fit into the construct of the new temple, of the millennial temple. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. But I want to make that point because you can't base it based on the tradition of Judaism without an understanding of why we did that and what the thinking was that you did not want to contaminate a sacred document or embarrass a woman. So there was a balance there. It was one about clean and unclean. It was another about singling somebody out for rejection, for persecution, if you will. So, this is carried over societally that women are less than, and it's just it's a perversion of Scripture. It's a perversion of truth. So how do we overcome this? How do we accomplish this repairing the foundation?
Well, it's interesting you use that word, foundation. We're always going to have challenges in this life. There's always going to be accusers. There will always be opposition. Satan is alive and doing well. And so without having a strong sense of identity in Jesus, the accusations that come from others then affect us, and we can't be who God designed us to be. One of the issues that pops up is there's scriptures about headship. Man is the head of the woman, and you want to dig into the exegesis of that, it'll take 5 hours. That's a really deep thing. But if you go back to the creation event and you look at how women are created, and you look at the fact that the name for woman is used to describe God himself when we're talking about help. All right. So there's a very respectful thing about that in the first place. But, one of the things that was an aha for me years ago, and it just is just powerful as a concept, is that who do you go to help from? Or who do you get your help from? Do you go to somebody who's not got a clue and just, if you work in a company and you're the CEO, do you go to, the janitor to ask, how should I run my company? I've got this big decision. No, you don't do that. You would go to somebody who's maybe a leader in another company that's bigger than yours, a guy that's been there, done that, right? So the help you're getting is from somebody who knows something, a spot of prestige, if you will. Not that women are better than men. We're not. We're different. But what's interesting is that when we look at that whole foundation, and then we look at God saying that your husband will rule over you as part, that's part of the fall right there, when sin entered the world. When relationships become about power and control, that's when the relationship starts to disintegrate. And then you start having these wars for power, instead of both of you coming together as equals and moving forward. And, there's times where we just need to lay down our secular cultural beliefs and get to know God on a whole different level, because that is where all of this truth and the confidence to be able to walk through this comes from. I admire Beth Moore in how she handled being told to go home by one of the leaders at a convention recently. I'm not going to name it, but what she did was just so full of grace. And she knows who she is in him, and she's going to do what she's been called to do, regardless of the voice of man, which is Acts 5:29. We live to please God, not man. And so when we figure out, and this is what our ministry does, we help women connect on a deeper level with God. And when they do that, they start to find their sense of self again and who they are, who he created them to be. And then they're able to walk forth, and it's for the gospel, and that's why we're here, is to bring God glory. So it's a little different than the world would want to portray that, and you end up with people trying to force that, which is the rowdy signs and waving and the really harsh speak. That doesn't accomplish anything. It really doesn't. The people that are able to move forward and have a position of influence, regardless of gender, are the ones that do not do that. They're the ones that are respectful and firm and know who they are. So, my 2 cents on that.
All of this was established in the original conversation we started with years ago about Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. Then goes on to say, husbands, love your wives, wives, respect your husbands. And I take a look at Priscilla and Aquila and look at them as a ministering couple. Here they were, spirit-filled couple, ministering the gospel together as a couple. And they ministered the gospel to Apollos, helped him understand more clearly. She is not ever mentioned independent of ministering with her husband, which shows the great unity of the ministry. In modern day, this would be the pastor's wife, if you would. Is it right or wrong to call her a co-pastor with her husband? I co-pastor with my husband. If you were to take a look at the narrative of Priscilla and Aquila, that's exactly what it was. She was a co-pastor. Together, they ministered to people. They welcomed Paul into their hearts and their home, and he established them in the doctrine. And they were equal as persons according to their marriage. Their functions were different. In marriage, they were one, and in ministry, they were affecting change as God would have them affect change as they ministered together. That's a goal. I think that should be the long-term vision of every couple, is that we find the rhythm and the compatibility and the understanding of God's calling so that we can, as a couple, minister together and bear the fruit of that unity. That to me is the example for how it's supposed to be.
And it's a beautiful example. And yet there's very extreme complementarians that will tear that down. And this is the thing with the Bible. You can go back to the original languages and all of that, but you will still see it through the lens that you're predisposed to look at anything with. And so if you walk into that trying to prove a point that you already have, then that's what you're going to find. I went through a period in my life where I needed to be more respectful towards my husband. And I had this perception that, I looked at headship as he was the head. And I looked at these, things from a very complementarian, almost extreme point of view. But that was a good thing for me because I needed to have pieces of me broken off and buffed off and pruned and all of that. And I've moved since then into a different space. And that, I think that's okay. I'm not suggesting that one person be better than the other. I'm not suggesting that, I'm woman, hear me roar kind of thing. We're not going to set any bras on fire today. But when you look at how do you have a great relationship, and there's reciprocity, there's equality, it's mutuality, and it's mutual submission as well.
It is.
And
It absolutely
yeah,
is. And that's why it's the Respect Dare. And you have the website greaterimpact.org, and you can find more about the Respect Dare and Nina Roesner there. Her newest book, 12 Truths to Change Your Marriage, a Respect Dare Journey for Wives. Just a powerful testimony, a powerful story, and one which husbands and wives both need to navigate and understand so that we can bring more success into our relationships, so that we can provoke others to say, what's different about you as a couple than there is with others? And it's because of your love for each other, your love for the Lord, and your understanding of respect and how that plays into the love narrative. Nina Roesner, always a pleasure to have you on the program.
same here. It's great to be here. Thank you, Rabbi.
God bless you. Have a wonderful holiday, and we will see you next year.
All right.
God bless. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.